We've talked a little bit about how to grow on social media, how to go viral on previous episodes of the Brand Gravity Show, but today we are going even deeper with a true expert in this arena. You're listening to the Brand Gravity Show. I'm your host, psychology-driven brand strategist Kaye Putnam, and my guest today is Brendan Kane. You might recognize him from his first book, 1 million followers, how he grew to 1 million followers in 30 days. And then he's recently authored the book Hook Point, How to Win in a 3-Second World. He has, along with his team at Hook Point, generated over 60 billion views and over 100 million followers on the content that they've produced, worked with brands in the past such as MTV, Vice, Taylor Swift, Rihanna. No big deal. Let's get to the conversation. Brendan, thank you so much for being on the Brand Gravity Show. I'm excited to dive into all things virality. I understand your newest book is Hook Point. Can you talk about what led you to write the latest book?
Yeah, I think it was, the first book did extremely well. And, when I started in social media, there was only a few million people on the platform. And, since the first book came out, the numbers just kept growing and growing and growing till today. There's close to 5 billion people on social media. So it's more evident than ever that being able to stand out in this new world that we live in of 5 billion people across the globe, being able to pick up a phone, click a button and post something is just more and more important if you want to make sure that your message is A, heard, and then B, well received. So Hook Point is kind of a larger perspective on communication across all mediums, including social media, of how do you really, grab people's attention, hold it long enough to get your point across, to then leverage it for your business goals and objectives.
Mm-hmm. And as you say, as a brand, we aren't just competing against other plumbers or course creators or copywriters. Our message is competing against the likes of Taylor Swift and Rihanna, two of your previous clients and people that you've worked with in the past. Is there a fundamental misunderstanding or a mistake that most people make when they start creating content?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few. I would say that the biggest one is understanding that this is a storytelling medium. And if you want to really reach the highest levels and break through consistently and have a lot of success, you have to become a masterful storyteller, and a masterful storyteller through the specific platform you're focused on. So just give you an analogy, I went to film school. I wanted to be a film producer. And what do you do when you go to film school? Well, you sit down and you study the best filmmakers in the world. You understand lighting, cinematography, dialogue, how a script is written, the 3 act structure, inciting incidents, all of these different elements that contributed to it. You watch the best filmmakers, you read the best screenplays from the best scriptwriters. However, when it comes to social media, because it's so easy, so creating a film it's getting easier, but it's still, people just don't pick up a camera and then just create their first film. But with social media, people can just pick up a phone and post something. And yet there's not a lot of thought that goes into, like, what does it mean to tell a story? What does it mean to tell a story on TikTok versus, in an article or in television or film or those things? So I think that that's one of the biggest misunderstandings and holds people back, because they're not looking at it as a storytelling platform and really thinking to themselves, how do I become a masterful storyteller? What is my format? What is my structure to really carry the message that I want to deliver to the world?
How do you recommend that clients figure out what that is? Or like, what is there like a recurring story that is told again and again and again for businesses that you work with? Or are you constantly finding new stories to tell?
Yeah, it's a great question. So going back to film, basically every movie over the past 80 plus years has used the same 3 act structure to tell a movie. It's when Steven Spielberg makes a movie, he's not reinventing that 3 act structure. He's getting better and better and better at it. Now with social media, there are hundreds of these formats. So there's very specific formats that work for specific platforms. And that's really a big part of the work that our team does, is to really dissect and understand those formats. So just to kind of give you an example, There is a format that you've probably seen on TikTok and Instagram that we call two characters, one light bulb. It's when the same person plays the expert and the novice, and they have a conversation with each other going back and forth. And they typically break down a misconception of their industry or subject matter. So it's used for legal, it's used for nutrition, it's used for insurance, all of these different subject matters. So what we kind of the process that we take clients through and the process that we use internally is if that was a format that we were interested in, most people would just say, "Oh, I see what they're doing, and they've generated 1 million views on a video, so I'm just going to have a conversation with myself, go back and forth." But that's not really how it happens. It's like saying anybody that uses a 3 act structure to make a movie is going to create an Academy Award winner, and we all know by watching movies that's not the truth. So the process that we take is we go through the qualitative analysis of that format. So what that means is we'll take 10 of the highest performing videos. So in that format, the high performers can yield 10 million views plus. Then we'll take 10 of the average performers, which there's probably like 700,000 to a million. And then we'll take the underperformers, which are like 10,000 views or less. And then what we do is we're looking at what's happening in those high performers. What are the storytelling elements, which we call performance drivers, are happening in those high performers that are not showing up in the average or the underperformers. So when we do it, we have like a performance driver library of like 150 elements. And these things can be like pacing, tonality, the number of edits, first 3 seconds, captions, title cards, facial expressions, body cues, environment, those elements. And we typically, when we analyze one of these storytelling formats, we try to kind of distill it down to 3 to 5 of these to not overcomplicate it. But what we're really looking at is what's the difference in the way that they're using this very specific format in a video that generates 10 million views versus 10,000 views? And not looking at it from a content lens, because as I mentioned, that format is used for many different subject matters, all the way from law to insurance. So it's not about the content, it's about the contextual nature of it. And that's like, again, going back to film schools, when you're dissecting a film, you're dissecting all of these elements of like dialogue, lighting, cinematography to understand, well, what makes this a great film or what makes this a poor film. So that's the exercise that we do to understand what contributes to the successful use of a format and what also contributes to the unsuccessful use of it. So again, you're becoming a masterful storyteller in that specific format.
I love that as a practical example of how you're being a student of this platform and of this process. Thank you so much for sharing that in that detail. That's incredibly useful. This is nitpicky, but how do you find the underperformers? Aren't they kind of by definition hard to find and track down?
Yeah, interestingly enough, it's not very difficult. So there's oftentimes when we do this exercise, we'll focus on a single creator to have a control. You know, so you will see a creator that uses a specific format that will generate 20 million views with that format and then also generate 100,000 views with that same format. But most people don't kind of like dig into a profile to kind of look at it. They just think, oh, this person has 5 million followers and this video has 20 million views. So subconsciously they think every video has 20 million views. But if you actually dig into it, there's a huge difference. Sometimes we will kind of broaden it out, either if we want to look at a larger kind of a creator base, or sometimes like we did a breakdown of Mark Rober. You know, Mark Rober is one of the best YouTubers on the planet. So his underperformers are not that low, or Mr. Beast isn't that low because they're at that highest level. Sometimes in those instances, we'll bring in other creators doing it, but oftentimes we're using the same creator, using the same format as that control so that we can really get a sense of what makes that format tick. But you'd be surprised. I mean, most creators, there's a huge fluctuation in performance using the same format.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed that as well. For the entrepreneurs who feel like they haven't broken through yet, who feel like all of their videos are underperformers, how do you recommend that they tackle this equation of virality? What do they do first?
I mean, I would start, and it's a great question because oftentimes creators or entrepreneurs are just looking at their own content and thinking that they're going to find the answers in their own content, their own data. But that's not the case. I mean, if you're stuck in a loop and you can't break through, likely the answers aren't there. So going back to kind of what we had just talked about is really study the specific platform that you want to focus on, and start taking a library, making a library of the different formats that interest you. And those formats will emerge after this, listening to this, you'll start seeing it. You'll start seeing that there's different, structures to creating content. Identify the one that you want to go after and then dig deep into it. Do that exercise of looking at what's the difference between the high performers, the average, and the low performers. Again, not from a content lens, but from the contextual nature. And I would also recommend that depending on the industry, oftentimes your competitors are not going to give you those answers because your competitors are probably underperforming as well.
Yeah.
So again, look at social media and these formats as kind of a vehicle to tell a story. Like when you look at movies, the 3-act structure is used for horror movies, drama, comedy, sci-fi, adventure, but you don't sit down and kind of be like, oh, this is another 3-act structure movie. It's flexible in its creativity. So like, again, the two characters, one light bulb, as an example, is if you see like Erica Kohlberg, that's a lawyer that uses it very successfully on TikTok and Instagram, look at it from the contextual nature if you're not a lawyer and you're a nutritionist or your personal trainer, so that you can kind of understand how you can take those learnings from a lawyer using a format and apply it to your subject matter.
Mm-hmm. And I love that you gave us an example that's more education based, because I feel like a misconception of even myself is that virality requires entertainment or humor. And I don't consider myself a funny person, so I feel like I struggle with virality. Are there certain psychological triggers or emotions that seem to perform best on social?
Yes and no. I would say it comes down to the format. And I like that you bring up the kind of this notion that it has to be silly or funny or a prank video or pets to go viral. You look at a clinical psychologist like Dr. Julie Smith, who does visual metaphors. She breaks down like PTSD, panic attacks, anxiety using visual metaphors to bring something like clinical psychology to TikTok, which most people think TikTok is silly dance videos, to make that go viral. Now, one of the core principles, to kind of more poignantly answer your question, one of the principles that we kind of use in helping content creators is we have a communication algorithm that's backed by 1.5 million communication assessments done worldwide. And what that data set shows us is there's 6 different ways that people will connect or disengage with your content, no matter the type of content that you're talking about. So the largest subset of the population is feeling based. You asked about emotion. So that's 30% of the population. They're going to connect with your story, with your content, based on how it emotionally makes them feel. And the second largest subset of the population is fact based. So for them, it's not about the emotional connection, is does this make sense? They want to know information, time frames, who, what, when, where, why. 20%, the third largest, is fun based. So they want to know, is this going to be stimulating in some way? Is it going to be exciting? They want to react to it. They want to have fun with it. 10% is values and opinions based. So for them is, do I trust this content? Do I trust this creator? Do I believe in them? Another 10% is imagination based. So these people are very reflective. Like the best analogy I can give you is Albert Einstein. If you ever read biographies about him, he would stare out the window for hours on end, reflecting on everything to come up with his theories. And then the smallest subset of the population is action based, 5%. So the best analogy I can give is, if you ever seen Mission Impossible and Tom Cruise, he is not feeling, he's not thinking, he's not believing, he's just running. They go for it. They just move super fast. So when we talk about like really connecting with people and content and the language that we use, the tones, the facial expressions, is how do we connect with that as many of those different ways as possible? Because
Yeah.
even with feeling based and emotion being the largest, 30%, if we only talk feelings and emotion, we disconnect from the other 70%. If you want to see a world-class case study in this, watch a Pixar movie, because Pixar uses this in all their screenplays. If you've seen like the movie Inside Out with all the little characters in the girl's head, there's a different character designed for each way that people perceive the world, to make sure that anybody can sit down and enjoy and connect with the content.
I love that so much. Oh, fantastic. You mentioned in your deck for Hook Point that marketing is an unfair game. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think it seems unfair in today's world. We already kind of talked about it, but pre social media, the world was very different. And it was unfair in a different way, meaning that to really market your message to the masses, you had to go through a radio station, television station, print. It wasn't accessible to everybody. Fast forward today, it's democratized that, but it's an unfair battle in another way in that we've got 5 billion content creators that are all fighting for the same attention. So seemingly it's in some ways it's more fair than it was pre-social media, but it's more unfair in that we have all of this competition. But the great thing is that if you learn these principles, if you learn kind of the storytelling elements and all the things that we're talking about, 99.9% of the content creators in the world are not doing what we're talking about. So if you start mastering these principles, that's where the exponential growth comes from. Like you look at Mr. Beast, he started in his bedroom. He didn't have a huge movie production company or anything. Like he sat there and learned all of these elements and how to become a master storyteller. And now he's the biggest influencer on the planet. And it's not because of luck. And it's not because he just gives away a bunch of money. It's because he's mastered the art of telling stories in these platforms. So I would say it's unfair because of the amount of competition, but it's definitely a winnable battle if you sit down and really learn what it takes to tell compelling stories and hold that attention across these platforms.
Yes. We already mentioned one really practical way that we can start being a student and start improving this skill set. Do you have other resources? Clearly, you have your book, so tell us more about that. But other ways that we can sharpen this skill of storytelling?
Yeah, I think that to simplify it, it really starts by studying content, being an active consumer instead of a passive consumer, because I'm sure everybody on this or listening to this, consumes content on social media. It doesn't mean you understand what you're consuming. You're using it as an entertainment vehicle instead of a learning vehicle. But I can't stress enough, like just sitting down, identifying your format, dissecting those nuances of it, and understanding what makes it drive. And then, another exercise is once you've kind of done kind of that homework and understand it, once you produce your first piece of content with that format, is like put your piece of content on one side and then one of the high performers on the other side and play them side by side. And again, don't pay attention to the content, but pay attention to those kind of performance drivers that you pointed out. And I can tell you definitively, if you're honest with yourself, you will see things that you're missing. You will see a big difference. And I think that that's oftentimes content creators that are not breaking through. They've never even thought to do that exercise. They've never tried it. And they'll see remarkable differences in that. But I mean, we have a team of researchers that just do this all day long, every day. Like we've done like 140 breakdowns of different formats at this point, and it takes us about 2 days to do it. So it's not like I'm sitting here just telling you to do something that we don't do ourselves. Like that's the core of kind of our process and model.
Yeah, that's incredible. Can you give us an example of another format that you've seen work well?
Yeah, so we mentioned the two characters, one light bulb. We mentioned Dr. Julie Smith, which does visual metaphors. Another kind of underrated one is the man on the street format, where basically you approach a random stranger on the street and interact with them in some way. We've done analysis of 7 different types of that. A friend of mine named Alex Stemp, he's a photographer, has reached 20 million followers on TikTok, and he approaches random strangers in the street and offers them professional photo shoots. There's another street hairstylist, Vic Blends, that does that by offering random strangers in the street haircuts. There was a photographer you may have heard of, Brandon Stanton, founder of Humans of New York. His was an image version of it where he would approach random strangers in the street, take a portrait of them, and then tell their backstory. So there's so many different applications of that man on the street format that work really well. Like there's, from a business perspective, there is a guy named Noah Kagan that does it really well on YouTube, where he knocks on wealthy people's doors and asks them how they made their first $1 million. stories behind their success. But that's another format that's wildly successful on social media.
I've seen a bunch of those and they are all really well done. I think there's another guy in New York City that'll like walk up to people and ask to see their houses and how much they pay for rent or
But
for
the
their
interesting thing
mortgage.
is, you said they're really well done. You're seeing the ones that are really well done. If you wanted to
Yes,
do it, you need to dig in and see the ones that aren't really well done, that which are the ones that aren't being seeded to you.
exactly. And I, I can't remember if it's called the artist dilemma or there's that gap that happens that when we're just like scrolling through social as an entertainment vehicle, it can seem really easier. It seems pretty simple to put together, but then once you actually try to do it yourself, you notice that your taste is elevated beyond what your capacity is. So there's actually that practice and development that needs to happen once you choose that format and decide to get in the sandbox and start creating. I'm not exactly sure how to word this question, and we've already danced around it, but I'm curious for a business that is, well, let me just give an example. So I have a client in the hospitality industry. They have a collection of boutique hotels, and they're a very specific kind of like industry tenants that you'll see do really well. How much do you pay attention to what's happening in the industry and the competition, the direct competition, and how much do you do that kind of like wide reaching scan and research of celebrities and movies and all those other different places where we can find inspiration?
Yeah, so there's different layers to that question. So in terms of competition, typically we will look at the competition. We know most of the time that the competition is going to tell us what not to do rather than what to do, unless you're kind of in an influencer space. But in the hospitality, I would say, most brands in that space, and just most brands in general, struggle with
Yeah.
social media. But then you also mentioned something interesting in terms of looking at movies, looking at celebrities and things of that nature. And you have to be very conscious and careful of looking at celebrities or big brands. Like sometimes we have clients say, well, we really love what Apple does and Amazon, or they'll point to celebrities. But the challenge there is so much of their success from the numbers associated, like number of followers or subscribers they have, are generated by external factors, not by social media. Meaning, like The Rock is one of the top 5 or 10 most followed people on Instagram. Well, every movie he's in, they're spending 150 million dollars promoting the movie and him. He's on the cover of every magazine, TV show, and things of that nature. Now, that doesn't dilute he's a great talent and things, but to look at The Rock and say, well, I'm going to learn from what he did and apply it, is not a good comparison. Same thing with Apple. Is like, also, if you look at, Apple spends billions of dollars a year on marketing. It's like, to look at Apple's social accounts for guidance is not the right way, because it underperforms for the audience size that they have. So typically, yes, we look at the competition, but typically we're looking from at the competition from a perspective of what not to do. And then when we're looking at other sources of inspiration, we just make sure that we're looking at sources of inspiration based upon the fact that those accounts or creators or brands generated that success from social media, not from external factors.
Yes, thank you for that distinction. That makes a ton of sense. For entrepreneurs that value speed, is there a way to shortcut success in this arena?
Get lucky. I mean, we shortcut success for our clients by doing all of this research for them.
Hmm.
However, we don't do the work for the client. So it's like, it's purely a mindset thing. We have a lot of clients come to us because of my first book and the way that it's titled, and they're coming to us for an outcome,
Hmm.
not for the blueprints that they can do the work on. Like, if you want to reach the highest levels of social media, and I'm not suggesting that that's the right fit for everybody, but if you want to really break through, it's work. Like, even for the people that, and I don't know, I think that, there are some people that get lucky in the beginning, but luck isn't maintained. Like, those people that continue to go is because they continue to work on it. First, just ask yourself, are you willing to put in the work? Do you have the right mindset? Are you doing it for the right reasons? And if you just want to move faster and just, figure out any way to make it happen, I don't think that organic social is the best route. I would focus more probably on paid acquisition. That's a bit of a quicker and easier way to drive kind of conversion based goals and objectives. So that's kind of what I would focus, is steer you away from maybe the organic path and more in the direct response paid advertising route.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, let's wrap up. Where can people find your book? Who should read the book? And what will they learn?
So both of my books are sold on Amazon, and you can just search my name, Brendan Kane. I have, my first book is 1 million followers. The second one is Hook Point. And I again, just to what I said, I think it's people that are really eager to learn, that have the right mindset, that they're willing to kind of put in the hard work. I would recommend starting with Hook Point. It's the more recent book, and it covers all different subject matters. So even if you want to go down the paid route, we talk about how to position it for that. If they want to just learn more about our process or get in touch with our team, they can go to hookpoint.com. We have a video and a free download of our PDF. So I think that those are the best places to start.
Amazing. What type of clients does your team work with these days?
Basically, we work in every industry or sector, and we work with solopreneurs all the way up to multi-billion-dollar corporations. So we're pretty bespoke in terms of the process and approach that we have based on the size of the client.
Perfect. Brendan, thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom with us today. I learned a lot, and I really appreciate everything that you share.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Brand Gravity Show. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did, and I would love to hear the follow-up. How are you going to implement this? What is the format that you are going to try on your social media marketing to grow faster and to pursue virality? I would love to hear either in the comments on YouTube or send me a DM on Instagram. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you in our next episode.